After airing the Paul Simon and Friends Variety Hour at second week instead of anything recognizable as Saturday Night Live, Week 3's show is much closer to the template the show would come to follow. A brief aside, in this first season the show was titled NBC's Saturday Night because of a program airing on ABC, Saturday Night Live with Howard Cosell. Although the programs did not air in the same time slot and were not direct competitors, it was still untenable to have such a similar title to a program on a rival network. Cosell's show, which was widely panned and is considered among the worst variety programs of the period, was cancelled after only 18 episodes, leaving the name available for Lorne's show on NBC. I'll most likely refer to it as Saturday Night Live or SNL, but technically the show didn't adopt that name until the second season. Call it what you like, Episode 3 contains several notable firsts in the history of the show, and I'll try to highlight them as we go. It is, however, an otherwise uneven and forgettable installment with an unlikable host. I've always thought that most folks who say they hate Rob Reiner really just dislike his politics, because his body of work isn't terrible. By 1976, the only notable achievements qualifying him to host were writing for the Smothers Brothers and winning an Emmy for his role on All in the Family, but he went on to be involved with some pretty great films. I figured, hey, the guy responsible for The Princess Bride couldn't be that bad. After learning about his SNL gig, though, I could be wrong about that. Rob Reiner and Lorne Michaels had been friends for a while by the time Lorne flew to LA to meet with Reiner and his wife, Penny Marshall, to discuss hosting one of the early episodes of SNL. "I think you're the most manipulative human being I've ever met," Marshall said to Michaels, "and you do it beautifully." Penny was a very smart lady. Anyway, Lorne didn't choose Reiner to host because of friendship. On one hand, Lorne was looking for hosts who were experienced in show business but not too TV, meaning they hadn't already become well known for appearing on The Carson Show or by doing other variety programs, or what Michael O'Donoghue would uncharitably describe as Carol Burnett shit. On the other hand, at least for the first half of the opening season, Lorne knew he needed a household name to draw publicity. The cast simply wasn't well known enough to draw an audience to the 11:30 time slot. Reiner was widely recognized at the time for his role on Norman Lear's popular sitcom, but almost as importantly had some credibility with The Youth because of that show's progressive portrayal of social issues. He must have seemed to Lorne like a good fit and a great solution to the problem of who to put on after Simon and Garfunkel. He was not. Reiner did three things that, looking back, are indicators of a bad host. Firstly, he was inflexible. He came in with certain ideas about what he would and wouldn't do on the show and didn't trust the crew to make them look good. I don't know how to stress that you really can't do this and survive on SNL as a host. Admittedly, all the pieces had yet to click by week 3, and the host was a bigger focus on the show than they would be going forward. I'd argue Reiner proved that host-centric approach was flawed and prompted a change for week 4. The second mistake Reiner made was arrogance. He knew Lorne needed him, so he made demands that, frankly, Lorne shouldn't have indulged. Uncomfortable with the traditional monologue, Reiner had concocted a character piece where he came on as a smarmy Las Vegas crooner, the type it must be noted that Bill Murray later successfully turned into a recurring character. The only problem was, Meathead's crooner wasn't funny like Murray's. At all. Over the course of 6.5 agonizing minutes, the crooner completely sucks the air out of the room, Vegasing up some songs by his late friend Bob Dylan, and generally just being unpleasantly artificial. Now, I know that was the point, the artificiality, but it's not entertaining or endearing artificiality. The audience is polite, as they tended to be even to the worst material in these early days, but didn't seem engaged so much as bewildered. They seem relieved when, at the end of the monologue, he leaves the stage, then comes back and breaks character. He takes off his wig and says, "I've always wanted to be one of those guys," and then just kind of trails off. End of monologue. Yeah. He also threatened to walk if Lorne wouldn't air the film Reiner's good friend Albert Brooks had submitted that week. Why wouldn't Lorne air it, you ask? Because they'd agreed on a 5-minute piece, and what Brooks submitted was 13. Lorne's position was that it was so long as to necessitate a commercial break in the middle, and that it would take them away from the live program for nearly 20 minutes altogether. Not wanting to lose his host, though, he made the concession. The third thing I noticed Reiner did that lots of the worst hosts tend to do is freak the fuck out after dress rehearsal and threaten to quit. Apparently Reiner didn't have much live theater experience, hadn't had a reassuring week leading up to Friday, and was convinced that if he went on, he'd end his career. Judging by his overall performance, I understand this fear. Lorne was able to reassure him into going on, and he honestly didn't have that much to do or worry about in the episode. Carlin had done 3 monologues and Simon 7 songs on their shows. Reiner did his monologue and appeared in 2 whole sketches, and all he did in the second one was whine and get yelled at by Belushi. Thankfully, they'd do much, much better the following week. Perhaps to counterbalance the prior episode, Week 3 has no musical guest as such. This, along with host Reiner's paltry contribution, means the not ready for primetime players get much more focus this week. Belushi debuts his pinpoint-accurate caricature of Joe Cocker here, immediately stealing the episode. Sure, he nails the physicality of Cocker gyrating around like a madman, but he also nails the vocal inflections equally well. I can't play a clip in this video, in fact, because it's too close to live versions that Cocker himself recorded and would probably get hit for a copyright strike. Belushi was scary good at this, if you ask me, and he could have just fronted a rock band. I said before this week didn't have a traditional musical guest, but I suppose the Lockers come pretty close to filling that role. They were an extraordinarily influential dance troupe led by Tony Basil and Don Campbell, the originator of the pop and lock dancing technique. Their performance here really comes out of left field, and it left me surprised and intrigued the first time I saw it in 2021. This kind of stuff must have seemed electrifyingly new and hip to folks seeing it in Middle America at the time, which is surely why Lorne decided to have them on the show. He always has relished being the first one to introduce the next big thing to the squares and flyover country. Andy Kaufman is back from week 1, making him the first returning guest in the show's history. He performs a similar routine this time, lip-syncing along to a record of Pop Goes the Weasel. There's a long spoken piece in the middle of the song which he pantomimes as well with millimetric accuracy, and it's a technically impressive piece of mime work, which nevertheless doesn't seem as groundbreaking as the Mighty Mouse piece had on the first show. Kaufman would continue to appear in segments like this periodically throughout the first 7 or 8 seasons. Lorne appreciated the ease with which he could be slotted into an episode to fill time when needed. He simply showed up, performed his piece, and left, requiring and expecting no maintenance or input from the show. We'll see more from him soon enough. So, if you were wondering why Rob Reiner's terrible monologue didn't win the coveted Worst Award thing in this episode, it's because of future cast member Diane Dillon's ill-conceived and painfully executed Nuns emceeing the Parish Talent Night sketch. Much the same as he had with Valerie Brumfield and Billy Crystal, it would seem Lorne gave this slot to Dillon as a consolation prize for having not been chosen as a member of the cast. Since I already spoiled that Crystal's shot at redemption doesn't go very well, and we all saw what happened to Brumfield last week, I guess I can go ahead and report that you should never take a consolation prize from Lorne Michaels. Where Brumfield had been the victim of having her piece cut for time, we're not that fortunate with Dillon's sketch. She and her co-writer Mark Hampton play nuns who are, well, emceeing a talent night at the parish hall. It is what it says on the tin and nothing more. Much like Brumfield's teacher, Dillon's characterization of the nun is solid. It just goes nowhere. I suppose maybe if I'd grown up Catholic this might be a little funnier to me, but I don't really think so. In a show full of painful and awkward silences, this sketch stands out as particularly listless. Its one redeeming quality is that Mark Hampton's cross-dressing portrayal of the keyboard nun drew complaints from whatever sort of strange and stodgy Catholics inexplicably were watching this weird-ass show at 1 a.m. when they were supposed to attend Mass 6 hours later. Honestly, how anybody could even tell that nun's a dude is beyond me. Definitely the Worst Award thing winner. As I mentioned before, this thing is 13 minutes long. What I didn't mention is that it's 13 minutes long and makes very little attempt at humor. In this film, Brooks takes us along as he undertakes preparations for his real dream, performing open heart surgery. He proceeds to spend far too long showing us detailed clinical explanations of the procedure, even the signing of insurance forms and camera releases, and telling no jokes whatsoever. I've enjoyed some of Brooks's work, even some of his films from the first season of SNL, but this is not entertaining, and between it and the nun sketch, the flow of the episode is ground to a halt. I'd probably say this is the weakest of Brooks's SNL material, largely down to the extreme length, and I can't understand why Reiner was so fanatical about ensuring it made it to air. The writers further established the phone call cold open for Update this week. The gag is that Chevy is engaged in a racy phone call with some lady and gets interrupted when he notices the camera is on, and I get the feeling it was an exercise in seeing what kind of salacious and sexy humor they could slip past the censors. This week is pretty mild, but over the course of the first season they graduated to thinly veiled sex toy and blowjob humor, which, sophomoric as it was also a strike against what they saw as prurient censorship from the network. This week in topical humor, Gerald Ford is still clumsy, George Wallace is still handicapped, Reagan dyes his hair, and Evel Knievel somehow is still relevant. We have another Lorraine from the Blaine report, this time on terrorist group Blowfish holding Don Pardo hostage. The whole gag is Pardo reading the terrorist demands in his advertiser voice, but it's cute. The advertisement this week is for Middle America van lines who don't move furniture, they move people. Yeesh. Finally, we close Update with Garrett Morris's first News for the Hard of Hearing, in which he reads back the day's top headlines extremely loudly, just in case you missed them because you're deaf. It's a clever gag which they would iterate upon throughout the season. I've managed to postpone talking about them for 3 episodes, so here goes. It's likely the Muppets were initially brought on to NBC Saturday Night for 2 reasons. The first is simply that both Lorne Michaels and Jim Henson were managed by the same powerful Hollywood agent, Bernie Brillstein, who had a knack for getting extremely lucrative deals for his clients, often by packaging them together. The second is that Michaels likely figured having recognizable names like Henson and filmmaker Albert Brooks would lend the show an air of legitimacy and help it to get picked up by a network. In the Live from New York book, writer Alan Zweibel recalls, whoever drew the short straw that week had to write the Muppet sketch. The first time I met writer Michael O'Donoghue, I walked into Lorne's office, and Belushi's there, Aykroyd's there, people the likes of which had never crossed my path before, and I look in the corner of the room and there's a guy I learned was O'Donoghue. What's he doing, you ask? He'd taken Big Bird, a big stuffed toy of Big Bird, and a cord from the Venetian blinds, and he wrapped the cord around Big Bird's neck. He was lynching Big Bird, and that's how we all felt about the Muppets. For his part, O'Donoghue simply proclaimed, "I don't write for felt," and left it at that. Usually the dread duty fell to rookie writers Al Franken and Tom Davis, who were also the ones who had to face the frequent pushback from Jim Henson when the material didn't meet Henson's exacting standards. "Scred wouldn't do this," he'd tell the writers without giving them much in the way of a clue as to what Scred would, in fact, say. Over the course of half the season or so, the writers tried their hands at various flavors of slightly risque, laughing caliber sex and drugs humor, but never found a voice that worked for them or fit the attitude of SNL. About midway through the season, as the not-ready-for-primetime players were booming in popularity and the show was becoming a phenomenon, Lorne realized that he no longer needed as much padding to provide a safety net in case they were short on material, and it was pretty clear that the Muppets would be the first things cut. In my opinion, the funniest they ever got was after the decision to cut them was made. They stuck around for several weeks begging for their jobs back, which served to actually make them relatable and kind of funny. Of course, by then it was too late. In this installment, the young ones smoking pot. Jeez. Henson's aesthetic was fairly gentle hippie humor, and the attempts made by the SNL writers at more anti-establishment topics in these skits play on tropes and stereotypes that the establishment themselves, and to a certain extent Henson, espoused and were comfortable with. It was closer to laugh in that regard. Those wild and wacky young people are really into drugs, aren't they weird? Where SNL's own take on drug humor was much more honest and felt like something written by people who use drugs in their daily lives rather than by folks poking fun at drug users. The same could be said for how the show's take on other subject matter didn't really gel with Henson's approach. As I've said, if I didn't generally disqualify them from the running, these would win the coveted worst award thing practically every week. I adore almost all things Muppet, but these sketches are dire. You've been warned. I watch them so you don't have to. Chevy has his first solo cold open this week, a great little piece where he's pushed on stage in a wheelchair by Jane. She leaves, and as he tries to light a cigarette, he drops his lighter. He then stands from the wheelchair, retrieves his lighter, and sits back down. A few beats pass, and he realizes that his legs just worked. He drops the lighter again, this time on purpose, stands to retrieve it, and immediately plummets to the ground painfully. It's a strong start to the tradition.
Live from New York, it's Saturday night!
I'm not really sure what the joke is here, other than that maybe your average Joe just doesn't know what a pancreas does. The thing is, though, the pancreas is actually an important organ, and if it fails, it can cause serious problems. Perhaps realizing this, the writers tried this idea again later in the season with a similarly silly-sounding but less serious organ, the uvula. In this one, Reiner and Penny Marshall host a fashion show where the cast members all make notable fashion faux pas. Gilda wears her underwear on the outside, Lorraine leaves the cellophane and hanger on her dress, Belushi inexplicably has a damn lobster stuck to his eyeballs. Perhaps the highlight is Michael O'Donoghue, who looks like he wants to bludgeon Reiner with his fancy walking cane as he demonstrates the famous toilet paper tail look. That guy always seems cranky, and from what I've read, he kinda was. In this one, Lorraine originates her portrayal of Squeaky Fromm, Manson family follower and failed assassin of President Ford. Squeaky's gun was loaded, but the bullet in the chamber had been ejected, she later claimed purposefully. The gag is simply that Fromm is certainly a danger to society, or would be if she wasn't just so adorably clumsy. Lorraine tries and fails a few times to murder interviewer Jane Curtin, and then it's over. In this pre-taped ad, a blind taste tester is revealed to be comparing her usual brand of canned tuna fish to what turns out to be tinned cat food. It's mean, gross-out humor, and I suspect O'Donoghue or Franken is responsible. This Drooler's Anti-Defamation League sketch contains possibly the first break on air. Chevy laughs at himself after he outs Don Pardo as a closet drooler. Chevy somehow got away with breaking in a way that made him seem endearing rather than bad at his job, a skill which I shall refer to as falloning, after the cast member who perfected it. This is otherwise just a silly Chevy showpiece. The guy was so damn telegenic, he managed to make very unglamorous things like falling down drooling into a multi-million-dollar career. It's pretty crazy to consider, honestly, and I have trouble thinking of a modern TV or movie star as willing to look clumsy and oafish for the sake of a dumb gag as Chevy Chase was here. I'd love to hear any suggestions for such a star down in the comments. Dan Aykroyd has a demented turn as a sadistic line dance caller. He commands them to do horribly violent and hurtful things to their partners while cackling maniacally. It's a wonderful little 2-minute ensemble piece and works perfectly. This skit encapsulates how mercurial and zany Danny was, but how he often got lost behind his characters and therefore wasn't as recognizable as Chevy or Dan. Of course, Aykroyd would get his recognition in time, and I personally rank him as one of the rare glue cast members like Phil Hartman and Kenan Thompson, who can hold just about any scene together no matter what. And, oh yeah, everyone but the band dies in the end. I love when that happens. What Gilda Ate was part of a series Lorne planned to do where he had cast members come out and just tell the crowd about themselves. It was an attempt to build some recognition for the rest of the cast other than Chevy, but I don't think they stuck with it very long. This particular one, in which Gilda recounts everything she ate in exhausting detail, is adorable and kind of sad at the same time. In hindsight, we know Gilda had a serious eating disorder, but to hear her talk about it, it's just a cute foible of hers. Said writer Marilyn Miller, "We were aware of Gilda's eating problems, but we didn't know it was called bulimia. We thought it was this incredibly brilliant idea that Gilda had thought up." Belushi nearly loses his shit on Reiner in this final sketch. Maybe there's some acting here, maybe it's just the real John coming out on stage for a second. It starts off as a straight dramatic scene with Reiner and Marshall at a table at a restaurant, with the ensemble portraying all the restaurant workers and other patrons as bees. Finally, Reiner breaks the scene to complain that he didn't want to do the stupid bee jokes, and then he was told he wouldn't have to work with them, etc. It's all played very straight. Then Belushi has his moment. He interrupts Reiner rather meekly to apologize.
"I'm sorry if you think we're ruining your show, Mr. Reiner. But, see, you don't understand. We didn't ask to be bees."
He then gets more and more agitated to the point that he's yelling and berating him by the end, and Tenay swinging back and forth wildly. Belushi had hated Reiner all week, found him pretentious, so you could see the real emotion in John. Neat way to end what was otherwise a pretty uneven show. It's a good thing next week's host, Candice Bergen, turned out to be a breakthrough for them, because week 3 was not a particularly strong showing. Stay tuned.